Joining me now is one of the top members of the House Oversight Committee, Democratic Congressman Gerry Connolly from Virginia. Congressman, thank you for taking a few minutes with us. Well, let me just start on this.
Great to be with you, Steve.
Your committee has said it would like to hear from the acting DHS chief, would like to hear from the CBP chief, and today was the deadline that the chairman, Elijah Cummings, had set for responses from them. Have you heard from them?
Not that I know of, Steve. It is the day before the holiday, so it's possible that it may have been delayed, but I have not been informed that we have had a positive response.
What is your view of Chuck Schumer is out there calling for the CBP chief to be fired? What's your view of that? Do you agree with that call?
Well, I'd like to have our hearing first and have him account for himself, and then we can all determine for ourselves whether he is, frankly, up to the job and whether he needs to take responsibility for the inhumane conditions migrant families find themselves in.
Do you think that having Chuck Schumer or having potentially other Democrats out there making that call before your hearings, making a demand for Mark Morgan to be fired, do you think that will affect his willingness to testify?
Hopefully it will inspire him to want to testify so that he can give his version of his management and defend himself. Frankly, if he just responds by, in fact, defying our request for hearing, I think he misses an opportunity to account for himself in public.
We mentioned the president this afternoon making some comments on Twitter. One thing he said here, I can read it. He said, if illegal immigrants are unhappy with the conditions in the quickly built or refitted detention centers, just tell them not to come. All problems solved. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's one of the most wretched statements any president has ever issued. First of all, it is a matter of virtually all faiths. That there's a standard set for moral behavior in terms of how we treat the stranger. We in America have a tradition that goes back to the founding of the Republic, welcoming those seeking asylum and refuge. For him to say what he said today is virtually to concede by implication that, yeah, I deliberately made the conditions inhumane to try to discourage them from coming. The results, the consequences, the trauma, the actual deaths of people in our care be damned. And I think that's just a value no American should want to emulate or accept the day before our independence celebration.
I want to put a poll result up here. This is from a CNN poll on the situation at the border. They put the numbers out yesterday. Ask this basic question of, is the situation at the border, does it amount to a crisis? And there is now broad consensus that the answer to that is yes. That consensus cuts across party lines. I think the number there, you can see it, is 74% saying yes. Remember, back in January, this was a much more contested question. Now there's broad agreement. The big change there is Democrats now, who were saying no in January, saying yes now. Where it seems there's disagreement here, Congressman, is the definition of that crisis. And to hear what you're saying about the conditions at these detention facilities, you at least define this as a crisis when it comes to the treatment of these children and the conditions at these facilities. My question to you is, do you also see the number, the volume of migrants trying to cross the border? 144,000 apprehensions in May, biggest number in 13 years. Do you also think that that constitutes a crisis?
Well, I think it constitutes a challenge. I think this administration has hyped the situation at the border. Remember the caravans that were the biggest crisis in the world? I think we have a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, in terms of how people are being treated. I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump contradicts himself because the nature of this enlargement of flight is that in the Triangle region in Central America, we have endemic violence, gang activity, and instability in those societies. And so naturally people want to flee that to protect themselves and their families. That's the crisis. And he wants to cut off aid to those countries at precisely the moment they need it. And oh, by the way, it's beginning to take hold and work.
One of the responses we have heard coming from your party on that debate stage, that presidential debate stage last week, one of your colleagues, one of your party's candidates for president, I should say, called for decriminalizing crossings of the border. And then other candidates, when asked about it the next night, agreed with that. Do you agree that crossing the border without authorization should be decriminalized?
I think we have to have a secure border. I don't know that we have to treat people crossing the border as criminals. And what gets confused here is we have a law that gives you rather strict guidelines in terms of how somebody is to be treated by our government when they formally go to a port of entry and ask for asylum. And this administration is treating that like it doesn't exist. And so everybody's being lumped together as people who have entered the country or tried to enter the country illegally. And so I think we have to sort that out. But criminalizing people for wanting a better life, I don't think is a humane way of dealing with migrants who want to come to this country. Yes, everybody should come here legally. We'll stipulate that. But we know that not everybody does. And that's been true throughout the history of our republic.
So that's the question then, on that idea of changing the approach to folks who try to cross the border without authorization, saying that is no longer going to be a criminal matter, that's going to be a civil matter. That's the call we're hearing on that stage last week in the Democratic debate. Do you agree with that?
Well, if that's my only choice, yes, I do. Because looking at what happens with an administration that has decided to treat these folks like criminals, including children, is simply not, to me, an acceptable way to deal with fellow human beings who are simply seeking a better life. They may not have made good choices in how they seek that better life, but we have to get at the root cause of this, which is not criminal. These are people fleeing violence, fleeing desperate conditions, who want to make a better life for themselves and their families, and that's not criminal.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.